Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Wilmington, North Carolina. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know how far these documented accounts reach and at what times of day or night. In the autumn of 1846, the Wilmington Port Authority recorded an unusual incident. A small package wrapped in oilcloth was discovered beneath the floorboards of a recently demolished warehouse on Water Street. Inside was a collection of correspondence that had never been delivered, letters bearing postage from 1842 to 1846. Among these abandoned messages was a particular envelope bearing the wax seal of the Devereux family, one of the wealthiest merchant families in New Hanover County. This seemingly insignificant discovery would eventually lead researchers to uncover one of the most troubling cases in the region's history, a case that the families involved spent decades attempting to erase from public record. The package changed hands several times before reaching Dr. Harold Mitchell, a historian at the University of North Carolina, in 1962. What he found inside those letters would cast a shadow over two of Wilmington's most prominent families, revealing a truth that had been buried for over a century. According to the university archives, Dr. Mitchell's subsequent research was never formally published. His notes indicate he abandoned the project after receiving what he described as concerning correspondence from parties with vested interests in maintaining historical ambiguities. The Devereux family estate stood on the northern edge of Wilmington, a grand federal-style plantation home positioned to catch the sea breeze. The property stretched from the eastern bank of the Cape Fear River to what is now Market Street. County records from 1840 indicate that the estate employed 38 enslaved persons and produced primarily cotton and tobacco. The house itself was considered one of the finest examples of antebellum architecture in the region, with its distinctive columns and wraparound veranda. The family patriarch, William Devereux, had established himself as one of the most influential cotton brokers in the port city, with business connections extending as far as Liverpool and Amsterdam. William's only son, Malcolm Devereux, appears in the historical record as having returned from studies in Boston in the spring of 1845. According to surviving correspondence between William and his business partners, Malcolm had been sent north to complete his education and was expected to assume management of certain family enterprises upon his return. What the letters did not mention, but what would later become apparent through Dr. Mitchell's research, was that Malcolm's time in Massachusetts had exposed him to abolitionist sentiments that would prove deeply problematic upon his return to North Carolina. Approximately 2 miles from the Devereux estate stood Crane Hill, the somewhat more modest home of Judge Thaddeus Crane, a prominent figure in the local judiciary and a man known for his strict interpretation of slave codes. The Crane property, while less extensive than the Devereux holding, was distinguished by its prominent position overlooking the river and its carefully maintained gardens, which, according to local newspaper accounts of the time, were considered among the finest in the region. Census records indicate the Crane household maintained a staff of 15 enslaved persons. The judge's daughter, Arabella Crane, 23 years of age in 1846, appears infrequently in official records of the period. Her name is mentioned in church registries and occasionally in society columns of the Wilmington Herald, where she is described as accomplished and possessed of remarkable musical talent. A daguerreotype discovered in the 1950s among the possessions of a Crane descendant shows a woman with a composed expression, dark hair arranged according to the fashion of the time, wearing what appears to be a silk dress with a cameo brooch at the collar. According to Dr. Mitchell's notes, the relationship between Malcolm Devereux and Arabella Crane began sometime in the summer of 1845, shortly after Malcolm's return from Boston. The nature of their early association remains unclear, though several sources suggest they had been acquainted since childhood, their families moving in the same social circles, despite what some observers noted as a growing political tension between Judge Crane and William Devereux regarding certain legislative matters. What is known with certainty is that by autumn of that year, Malcolm had become a regular visitor to Crane Hill, ostensibly to participate in literary discussions hosted by Mrs. Crane. These gatherings were mentioned in several personal diaries kept by Wilmington society women of the period. One such diary, belonging to a Mrs. Eleanor Fairchild, notes, "Miss Crane's attention seems quite fixed upon young Mr. Devereux, despite her father's apparent disapproval. One wonders if the judge's concerns relate to the young man's rumoured sympathies." The first indication that something was amiss came in December of 1845. According to the ledger of Dr. James Whitfield, the Devereux family physician, he was called to attend to Malcolm following what was described as a riding accident that left the young man with several broken ribs and facial bruising. The physician noted that William Devereux seemed unusually agitated and insisted the incident not be discussed beyond the household. 3 weeks later, the Wilmington Herald reported that Judge Crane had announced his daughter's engagement to Colonel Preston Lawrence, a widower 25 years her senior and a prominent plantation owner from Brunswick County. The announcement mentioned that the wedding would take place in April, an unusually short engagement period for a family of their standing. No mention was made of Arabella's sentiments regarding the match. It was around this time that Malcolm Devereux began making frequent trips to the Wilmington docks, particularly to an area known as Packet Landing, where ships departed for northern ports. According to the harbour master's registry, Malcolm made inquiries about passenger schedules on at least 5 separate occasions between January and March of 1846. During this same period, Judge Crane reportedly increased the number of household staff assigned to accompany his daughter when she left the property. In February of 1846, a curious incident was recorded in the sheriff's daily log. A house slave from the Crane household, a woman identified only as Ruth, was apprehended approximately 12 miles north of Wilmington on the road to New Bern. The record indicates she was carrying a sealed letter, though the contents and intended recipient were not documented. Ruth was returned to the Crane household, and according to an entry in Judge Crane's personal account book, was subsequently sold to a plantation in South Carolina. As the date of Arabella's wedding approached, Malcolm's behavior became increasingly erratic. Church records indicate he stopped attending Sunday services, and according to a letter from William Devereux to his brother in Charleston, Malcolm had begun expressing sentiments entirely inappropriate to his station and upbringing. The letter further mentioned that William had been forced to take measures to correct his son's dangerous misconceptions. What happened next is documented in fragmentary form across several sources. On the night of April 3rd, 1846, 3 weeks before Arabella's scheduled wedding, both the Crane and Devereux households reported disturbances. According to sheriff's records, Judge Crane reported a domestic incident that required no official intervention. That same night, a fire was reported in an outbuilding on the Devereux property. While the blaze was contained, the Wilmington Fire Brigade noted that it appeared to have been deliberately set. The following morning, neither Malcolm Devereux nor Arabella Crane could be located by their respective households. Judge Crane immediately organized a search party, while William Devereux reportedly confined himself to his study, refusing to speak with anyone except his attorney. The search continued for 3 days, eventually extending to neighboring counties and the port of Wilmington. On April 7th, Arabella Crane was discovered at an inn in New Bern, approximately 80 miles northeast of Wilmington. According to the innkeeper's statement to local authorities, she had arrived 2 days earlier in the company of a young man who matched Malcolm's description. The man had departed the previous evening, telling the innkeeper he was securing passage on a northbound vessel. Arabella was returned to her father's home under escort, and Colonel Lawrence announced that the wedding would proceed as planned, though the date was postponed by 2 weeks. Malcolm Devereux did not return to Wilmington. A ship's manifest from April 8th shows a passenger matching his description departing New Bern for Philadelphia. William Devereux publicly disowned his son on April 12th, placing a notice in the Wilmington Herald that stated Malcolm was no longer recognized as heir or family member, and that any debts or actions taken by him would not be acknowledged by the Devereux estate. Arabella Crane married Colonel Preston Lawrence on May 2, 1846, in a ceremony described by the Herald as subdued yet elegant. Witnesses noted that Judge Crane appeared satisfied with the union, though one account mentioned that the bride moved as one in a trance, speaking only when directly addressed. The newlyweds departed immediately for Colonel Lawrence's estate in Brunswick County. What followed might have remained completely hidden had Dr. Mitchell not discovered the package of undelivered letters in 1962. Among the correspondence was a series of letters written by Malcolm Devereux from Philadelphia between April and November of 1846. All were addressed to Arabella, though it appears none were ever delivered. Their contents revealed that the relationship between Malcolm and Arabella had been far more complex than social acquaintance. According to Mitchell's analysis, Malcolm and Arabella had developed a plan to escape to Philadelphia, where Malcolm had connections through his education in Boston. More troublingly, the letters revealed that their plan had included arranging for the escape of several enslaved persons from both households. The fire at the Devereux property had been a diversion, allowing Malcolm to remove certain documents from his father's study, papers that apparently provided evidence of financial improprieties that Malcolm believed could be leveraged to protect himself and Arabella from pursuit. Malcolm's letters expressed increasing desperation as months passed without response from Arabella. In his final letter dated November 15, 1846, he wrote that he had received information that made him fear for Arabella's safety and that he intended to return to North Carolina despite the obvious dangers. This is the last known correspondence from Malcolm Devereux. County death records show that Colonel Preston Lawrence died on January 23, 1847, just 8 months after his marriage to Arabella. The cause of death was listed as apoplexy, though no physician's certification was included with the filing. Arabella inherited a considerable portion of the Lawrence estate and returned to her father's home in Wilmington by February of that year. The subsequent fate of Malcolm Devereux remained unknown until 1964, when Dr. Mitchell's research led him to a set of unusual entries in the accounts of the Grove Plantation, a property adjacent to the Lawrence estate. The ledger, discovered in the Brunswick County Historical Society archives, contained entries for November 1846 that included payment to 4 men for special night watch and an unusually large purchase of quicklime from a Wilmington supplier. A separate entry noted expenses for repair of damaged fencing along the North Marsh. In December of 1847, Arabella Crane Lawrence left Wilmington. Passenger records indicate she boarded a ship bound for Charleston, but there is no record of her arrival. Judge Crane announced that his daughter had chosen to relocate to Europe for her health following the tragic loss of her husband. No further official record of Arabella exists in North Carolina archives. The Wilmington Herald of January 1848 carried a brief notice stating that William Devereux had sold his property and business interests and relocated to Richmond, Virginia. The Devereux estate was purchased by a business consortium and later divided into smaller parcels. The main house was destroyed in a fire in 1853. In 1965, during construction work near what had once been the Lawrence property, workers uncovered human remains in an area that would have been marshland in the 1840s. According to the county coroner's report, the skeleton was that of a male, approximately 25 to 30 years of age. The remains showed evidence of a fractured skull and broken fingers. Due to the age of the remains and lack of identifying features, no further investigation was pursued, and the bones were reinterred in an unmarked grave in the Brunswick County Cemetery. Dr. Mitchell's final notes on the case, dated March 1968, include a curious addendum. While researching Crane family records, he discovered that Judge Thaddeus Crane had maintained correspondence with a small convent outside Paris until his death in 1862. The last letter, found among the judge's personal effects, acknowledged receipt of funds for the continued care and seclusion of an unnamed woman. A note in the margin, apparently added by the judge, read simply, "Let the silence continue." The undelivered letters that revealed this long-buried history were placed in the university archives following Dr. Mitchell's death in 1969. According to archival records, they were removed during a reorganization in 1971 and have since been listed as location unknown. What truly happened between Malcolm Devereux and Arabella Crane in those critical days of April 1846? The fragmentary evidence suggests a desperate attempt to escape the strictures of their society, a plan that resulted in Malcolm's probable murder and Arabella's lifelong confinement. Yet the full truth remains elusive, buried beneath layers of family honor, social propriety, and the deliberate erasure of inconvenient history. The land where these events took place has been transformed over generations. Modern highways and developments cover what were once plantation fields. The Cape Fear River still flows past Wilmington, but the docks where Malcolm sought passage to freedom have long since been rebuilt and repurposed. Nothing remains to mark the tragedy that unfolded there. Nothing except perhaps the occasional report from residents near the old Lawrence property who describe hearing, on certain autumn nights, what sounds like someone moving hurriedly through the marsh grasses, followed by a silence that seems somehow expectant, as if waiting for a response that never comes. Some stories refuse to remain buried, no matter how carefully they are hidden. The tale of Malcolm Devereux and Arabella Crane emerges from the shadows of history as a reminder that beneath the polished surface of every society lie secrets that powerful interests would prefer to keep concealed. In the end, perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this case is not what we know, but what remains forever hidden, lost in the spaces between documented facts, in letters never delivered, and in voices permanently silenced. In 1968, a graduate student assisting Dr. Mitchell reported finding a small package inside a hollowed section of an old desk purchased from an estate sale in Brunswick County. The package contained a cameo brooch, matching the one visible in Arabella's daguerreotype, and a folded piece of paper bearing a single line of text. "The truth lives in silence." The student stated that Dr. Mitchell seemed unusually affected by the discovery and locked the items in his office safe. After his death, university officials found the safe empty. To this day, no definitive account exists of what transpired between these two young people from prominent Wilmington families. Their story has been reconstructed from fragments, suggestions, and the negative spaces in historical records. The things not said often speaking more loudly than what was recorded. Like so many truths from that troubled period of American history, the full reality of Malcolm Devereux and Arabella Crane lies buried beneath layers of deliberate forgetting, their voices echoing faintly across time, almost but never quite silenced. The sound of footsteps in a marsh at night, a fire set as diversion, letters that travelled but never arrived, the purchase of quicklime and the repair of fencing, a marriage performed in trance-like compliance. These are the pieces of a puzzle that forms no complete picture, yet suggests a truth too uncomfortable for their contemporaries to acknowledge. And perhaps that incompleteness is itself the most honest testament to their story. A narrative that, like so many others from that era, was systematically dismantled and scattered before it could fully take form in public consciousness. Those who walk the streets of modern Wilmington pass daily over ground where this history played out, unaware of the drama of thwarted escape, forbidden attachment, and final retribution that transpired beneath their feet. The buildings have changed, the families have dispersed or transformed, but something of that silenced history remains, preserved not in monuments or official records, but in the persistent, quiet resonance of a truth that refuses to disappear entirely. The absence of Malcolm Devereux and Arabella Crane from official history represents not a successful erasure, but rather a negative space that outlines precisely what powerful interests most feared. The revelation that even within the most rigid social structures, the human heart rebels, seeking freedom at terrible cost. The distance between 1846 and today may seem vast, but the mechanisms of concealment, the protection of powerful interests, and the burying of inconvenient truths remain familiar features of our world. In the words Dr. Mitchell wrote in his final research notes, some silences speak volumes to those willing to listen. The story of Malcolm and Arabella serves as a reminder that what is officially recorded often bears only passing resemblance to what actually occurred, and that the full accounting of history must include what was deliberately omitted from its pages. As night falls over Wilmington and the Cape Fear River reflects the lights of the modern city, one might imagine Malcolm Devereux still waiting at the docks, watching for a figure who will never arrive, while somewhere in the distance, behind the walls of a grand house or perhaps a French convent, Arabella Crane Lawrence stares out a window, her silence preserved at tremendous cost. Their story continues in that suspended moment of expectation and loss, a moment that, for them, never ended. And perhaps that is why even now residents occasionally report unusual sounds near the old properties, not supernatural manifestations, but rather the persistent echo of a truth that was buried but never truly died. In the rustling of marsh grasses, in the creaking of old boards, in the spaces between documented facts, Malcolm and Arabella remain, their silenced voices still speaking to those who know how to listen. The most troubling aspect of their story may be not its tragic outcome, but rather how easily it was excised from public memory, how thoroughly a romance that challenged the foundations of their society was transformed into an absence, a gap in the historical record that most would never notice was there at all. In that erasure lies perhaps the true horror of their tale, the understanding that history itself can be curated to remove what makes the powerful uncomfortable, leaving behind only the narrative that reinforces existing order. And yet, despite all efforts to erase them, Malcolm Devereux and Arabella Crane found their way back into the light, if only as shadows, as suggestions, as questions, without complete answers. Their resistance to permanent silencing may be their most enduring legacy, a reminder that no truth, no matter how deeply buried, remains forever hidden from those determined to uncover it. As one local historian noted in a margin comment on Dr. Mitchell's unpublished manuscript, the story of Devereux and Crane is not unique in its tragedy, but rather in the fact that traces of it survived at all. One wonders how many similar tales lie forever buried, with no misplaced letters or curious researchers to bring them back into memory. The next time you walk the streets of historic Wilmington, perhaps pause for a moment near the river, where ships once departed for northern ports. Listen to the silence and consider what stories it might contain, the voices that were not permitted to speak, the truths that were not allowed to be recorded, and the human lives caught between the unyielding structures of their time and the timeless impulse toward freedom and connection. In that contemplative moment, you might hear what Dr. Harold Mitchell heard in 1968, not a supernatural whisper, but the persistent echo of silenced history still resonating across years and generations, reminding us that what is forgotten is not necessarily gone, and that the past, no matter how carefully buried, has a way of finding its path back into the light. One of the most intriguing aspects of this case emerged during the final phase of Dr. Mitchell's research. According to his notes, he had managed to locate a descendant of one of the enslaved persons from the Devereux household, a woman named Martha Wilson living in Philadelphia. Mrs. Wilson, then in her 70s, possessed a collection of oral histories passed down through generations of her family, including accounts of the events at the Devereux plantation in 1846. According to Mrs. Wilson's family narrative, Malcolm Devereux had indeed been planning not only his escape with Arabella, but had arranged for the freedom of at least 5 enslaved persons from the Devereux household. The plan had been discovered when one of William Devereux's trusted house servants overheard Malcolm speaking with a northern ship captain at the docks. The servant, hoping to secure his own improved standing in the household, reported the conversation to William. Mrs. Wilson's great-grandmother, a woman named Sarah who had worked in the main house, witnessed the confrontation between father and son that followed. She described William Devereux as cold with rage and Malcolm as defiant beyond reason. The argument ended when William struck his son with a paperweight, rendering him unconscious. Sarah was ordered to clean the blood from the study floor and told that the young master had taken ill and would be recovering in his room. That same night, according to the family account, Malcolm was removed from the house by 3 men employed by his father. Sarah never saw him again, though she overheard conversations suggesting he had been taken to a remote hunting cabin owned by the family, where he was to remain until his senses returned to him. 2 weeks later, when news reached the Devereux household that Arabella Crane had been found in New Bern, William Devereux dispatched the same 3 men on an urgent errand. They returned 3 days later, late at night, and met privately with William in his study. The family history recorded by Mrs. Wilson included a curious detail. The morning after this meeting, Sarah noticed that one of the men had a fresh wound on his hand, which he explained as an injury from digging in rocky soil. The following day, William Devereux announced that his son had fled to the north, and soon after published the notice of disownment in the Wilmington Herald. The most troubling element of Mrs. Wilson's account concerned Arabella Crane's return to Wilmington. According to information passed down through her family, 2 of the enslaved women who worked in the Crane household reported that Arabella returned in a state of profound distress. She spoke rarely, ate little, and was kept under constant supervision by her father. On at least one occasion, she was reportedly overheard asking about Malcolm's whereabouts, to which Judge Crane responded that young man has gone where he can cause no further trouble. The women noted that Arabella wept continuously for several days after this exchange. Dr. Mitchell's notes indicate that he attempted to corroborate Mrs. Wilson's family history with other sources, but faced considerable resistance. Several archives claimed that relevant documents were unavailable or restricted. A fire at the Brunswick County Courthouse in 1947 had destroyed many records from the period in question. Most tellingly, perhaps, when Mitchell approached descendants of the Crane family living in Richmond, he was informed through an attorney that they would pursue legal action if he published any material defaming the character or actions of their ancestors. What makes the Devereux Crane case particularly disturbing is not just the apparent murder of a young man and the forced marriage, and possible confinement of a young woman, but the efficiency with which these events were excised from public knowledge. The power of the families involved allowed them to control the narrative completely, transforming what was likely a brutal crime into a mere footnote about a disowned son and a daughter who relocated to Europe. In 1967, during the final stages of his research, Dr. Mitchell made contact with a former employee of the French convent where Arabella was believed to have been sent. The woman, who had worked as a domestic servant at the institution from 1930 to 1955, recalled stories about an elderly American woman who had lived in a private wing of the building until her death sometime in the 1910s. According to convent law, the woman had never spoken during her decades in residence, communicating only through written notes. She was visited annually by a representative of an American law firm who ensured that her financial arrangements remained in order. The servant mentioned that after the woman's death, while cleaning her quarters, she discovered a small compartment built into the base of a writing desk. Inside was a miniature portrait of a young man and a pressed flower, reportedly a Carolina jessamine, the state flower of South Carolina. These items were turned over to the Mother Superior and subsequently disappeared. The woman's remains were interred in the convent cemetery under a stone bearing only the initials ACL. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of the case lies in a detail from one of Malcolm's undelivered letters. In what would prove to be his final communication, he wrote, "I have secured a small house near the Schuylkill River. From the upper window one can see the water and the passing boats. I have planted jessamine along the garden wall, thinking it might remind you of home, though I hope in time you will come to think of this place as home as well. The friends we helped to freedom have found employment and lodging nearby. They ask after you often. We have created here a small island of the world as it should be, not as it is. All that remains is for you to join us." The house Malcolm described was identified by Dr. Mitchell through Philadelphia property records. It had been sold in December of 1846, just weeks after Malcolm's disappearance. The new owner, according to the deed, was a William Smith, a name that appears nowhere else in connection with the case, and may well have been an alias used by someone acting on behalf of the Devereux or Crane families to remove any trace of Malcolm's presence in the city. As for the friends Malcolm mentioned, the enslaved persons who had apparently escaped to Philadelphia with his assistance, their fate remains unknown. No records have been found identifying them by name, and without such information, tracing their subsequent lives has proven impossible. They represent yet another silence in this already fragmented history. In his final research notes, dated just 3 months before his death, Dr. Mitchell wrote, "The true horror of the Devereux Crane case lies not in what can be verified, but in what was successfully hidden." The power structures of the time did not merely punish those who transgressed social boundaries, they erased them so completely that even the memory of their transgression would not survive to challenge the established order. In this, they very nearly succeeded. Dr. Mitchell's papers were donated to the university archives following his death, but his work on the Devereux Crane case was never published. According to colleagues, he had expressed concerns about the legal implications of revealing information that cast prominent historical families in such a negative light. There were also suggestions that he had received anonymous communications urging him to abandon his research, though no evidence of these has been preserved. In 1978, a graduate student named Elizabeth Collins attempted to build upon Mitchell's research for her doctoral dissertation. According to university records, she abandoned the project after 6 months, citing insufficient primary sources and methodological difficulties. She subsequently left the university program entirely. Attempts to contact her for this account were unsuccessful. The physical landscapes where this history played out have been transformed by time and development. The Devereux plantation was subdivided and eventually became part of Wilmington's northern residential districts. The Lawrence property in Brunswick County was absorbed into a commercial forestry operation in the 1950s. The marsh, where human remains were discovered, has been drained and now lies beneath a housing development. Even the university archives, where Dr. Mitchell's papers were stored, have been reorganized, with many documents from that period digitized and the originals moved to off-site storage. And yet, despite these physical transformations and the deliberate efforts to erase this history, fragments of the story have persisted, emerging from undelivered letters, family oral histories, margin notes, and the spaces between official records. Like water finding its way through stone, the truth has seeped through the barriers erected to contain it, emerging in unexpected places and times. The name on the inside cover had been deliberately scratched out, but the contents described the writer's friendship with A.C. and her concerns about the young woman's declining spirits following her marriage to the Colonel. The final entry, dated January 25, 1847, 2 days after Colonel Lawrence's reported death, contained only the cryptic line, "It is done, may God forgive us all." The diary was submitted to the New Hanover County Historical Society, but was subsequently reported missing from their collection in 2014. In 2012, during renovation of one of Wilmington's oldest churches, workers discovered a small metal box sealed inside a wall cavity. The box contained a woman's diary dating from 1846 to 1847. No investigation into its disappearance was conducted. In a curious epilogue to this fractured history, land surveys conducted in 2018 for a development project near the former Lawrence property uncovered the foundations of what appeared to be a small outbuilding approximately half a mile from the main house site. Archaeological investigation revealed that the structure had burned at some point in the mid-19th century. Among the artifacts recovered from the site were a man's pocket watch, several brass buttons consistent with styles from the 1840s, and most significantly, a signet ring bearing the Devereux family crest. The State Archaeological Office classified these findings as items of historical interest, but determined that they did not warrant further investigation or preservation of the site. Construction proceeded as planned, and today, a row of upscale homes stands above whatever secrets might remain buried there. The story of Malcolm Devereux and Arabella Crane represents not just a personal tragedy, but an example of how effectively power can erase inconvenient truths from historical record. Their attempt to challenge the fundamental structures of their society, both in their relationship across family political divisions and in their apparent effort to assist enslaved persons to freedom, threatened the established order in ways that could not be tolerated. The response was not merely punishment, but obliteration, a complete removal from the historical narrative. That we know anything at all of their story is due to chance and persistence. The accidental preservation of undelivered letters, the oral histories maintained by descendants of those who witnessed these events, the curious inquiries of researchers unwilling to accept the sanitized official accounts. These fragments allow us to glimpse, however imperfectly, the outlines of a truth that powerful interests thought permanently buried. As you walk the streets of modern Wilmington, consider that beneath your feet lie not just the physical remains of the past, but its silenced stories as well. The official histories preserved in monuments, plaques, and tourist brochures tell only part of the story, often the part most comfortable to those whose ancestors held power. The fuller truth resides in what was not preserved, not commemorated, not passed down through official channels. In that silence, if you listen carefully, You might hear echoes of Malcolm Devereux and Arabella Crane, two young people who dared to imagine a different world and paid the ultimate price for their vision. Their story, pieced together from fragments and negative spaces, serves as a reminder that history is not merely what is recorded, but also what is deliberately forgotten, and that the most important truths are often those that someone went to great lengths to conceal. The most disturbing realization that emerges from studying this case is how many similar stories must have been successfully erased, leaving no trace for even the most dedicated researcher to discover. For every Malcolm and Arabella whose story partially survived, how many others disappeared completely from historical memory, their challenges to the established order eradicated so thoroughly that we cannot even know what we have lost. In the end, perhaps the most fitting memorial to Malcolm Devereux and Arabella Crane is not a physical monument, but rather a commitment to questioning official narratives, to searching for the voices that have been silenced, and to recognizing that history, as it has been preserved and presented to us, is often less a complete record of the past than a carefully curated selection designed to reinforce particular perspectives and power structures. Their tragedy lies not just in their apparent fates, his murder, her confinement, but in the near success of the effort to remove them from historical memory entirely. That fragments of their story have survived to be pieced together is both a testament to the persistence of truth and a sobering reminder of how many other truths have been lost beyond recovery. As night falls over Wilmington and the Cape Fear River reflects the lights of the modern city, one might imagine these two young people still waiting. He for her arrival in Philadelphia, she for word of his safety, suspended forever in that moment of hope before reality descended upon them. Their story, fragmented though it is, stands as a testament to both the human capacity for courage and the lengths to which power will go to protect itself from challenge. And somewhere, perhaps, in the rustling of leaves or the whisper of river water against the shore, their voices continue to speak to those willing to listen, not as supernatural manifestations, but as the persistent echo of a truth that refused to remain buried, despite all efforts to consign it to oblivion.